あやつは一体すすはら進む何者
そなたの無念と進も我が鹿と引き受けようぞ。小賢しき人鬼どもの五つ子の邪法によって分けられたすすだが、再び一つに戻ることを誰も食い止められはせぬ。六神彦の御事の呪いは一つに戻る。そして兄上様のご無念を慰めるに足る大災厄となりて、人鬼どもを必ずや滅ぼすのだ。
すずむ、もうすぐご飯できるから、それくらいにしてシャワー浴びてきたら？
It didn't seem Suzumu had hurt her. His heart and soul were devoted solely to his training. Tsubakiko called out to him again, but his focus remained unbroken. I felt like something was coming into view. The divine curse has resided in the both of them, feeding off of their mental trauma. Twice had my fist reached them. Perhaps the second time was also a fluke, but it had reached nonetheless. At first I only felt it with my fingers, but this time I felt it with my palm, a resistance of sorts. Perhaps this was arrogant, but I felt I needed to say it. Step by step, I was slowly but surely approaching the essence of the divine tribute style. I always felt it with my hand. I just had to grasp it, clench my hand into a fist and dedicate it.
Sit! あれ、キコちゃん。
食べる？ご飯。温め直すよ。話しかけても全然聞こえてないんだもん。すっごい集中力だったね。
うん。もう少しつかめそうなんだ。
つかめるとどうなるの？
みんなを助けられると思
う。みんなって？
The faces of those in the LCSC suffering from hauntings flashed through my head, but they weren't the only ones. The divine curse had lasted 1,000 years. Simply saving a few of its descendants wouldn't cut it, I could tell. So all I could say was this.
みんなだよ。みんな、僕が助けたい。
All the people who suffered from the machination of the divine curse. The shrine's visitors went to pray not at the main hall, but the worship hall built in front of it. Many unfamiliar with the shrine assumed that it was the main hall. The Shintai for the god deified in this shrine was stored in the main hall, however not the worship hall. As such, it was regarded as sacred, and not even the chief priests could enter without permissions. There were some shrines where not even the head priests ever beheld their shrine's Shintai. Iwaihime Shrine's main hall was only open a few days a year for cleaning, but the general public wasn't allowed inside, just the chief priest of the Kurkamis and the representative of the parishioners. Thus, it was a very sacred and majestic place for Toei. A bulky temple bell hung from a thick rope. The room was decorated reverently, signifying this bell was unmistakably the shrine's Shintai. But the bell was neither fancy nor all that special. It was a cursed bell, covered faintly in soot that no amount of polish could ever remove. The cursed millennium began from the moment Suzunome was sealed inside it and the soot gathering ritual was conducted. Since the bell was hanging off the ground, one could crawl into it if they wanted. Toei had tried to do just that as a child and was scolded harshly. She was told the area under the bell was very sacred and thus off limits. Toei had come to the dimly lit main hall all by herself. She kneeled in front of the bell. After that, she quietly opened her mother's letter. Read this only when you can no longer bear the stones in your stomach. The agony in her stomach was nigh unbearable by now, meaning the time had come. The foreword contained information from her mother and grandmother had passed down. The both of them had discerned that the seal on the cursed suit would break someday, but they couldn't just let that come to pass. To seal the suit away forever and keep this land safe, that was the duty passed down to the daughter of the Kurokami family, generation after generation. It seemed her grandmother had been seriously considering how to prepare for that day. The seal had almost broken several hundred years ago, but the crisis was averted when they divided up the suit with the quintuplet spell, and that was the only way the Kurokamis had of extending it. But the tome with the spell had been lost to a fire. Thus, there was an urgent need to find an alternative to a spell. As a result, they had discovered one last viable resort. The final resort was written in the letter. First of all, the seal could not last forever. That was a fact. But it was mere wishful thinking that dilating the suit at just the right time would prevent a full-blown calamity. In the end, the daughters of the Kurokamis would not be rewarded for keeping the curse sealed for 1,000 years. Despite that, however, there was one last resort that could weaken the calamity at least a little. Her grandmother had once considered using it to end her own cursed life. She couldn't bear the thought of having a child doomed to suffer from the same agony as her. But in the end, she couldn't help but believe in the unfulfilled dream she, her ancestors, and her descendants had all clung to until the bitter end. That the curse would somehow end, and Rokugami Hiko no Mikoto's wrath would be quelled. Otherwise, there will be no reward for the 1,000 years of suffering. Which is why this last resort was only for when all hope of that miracle seemed lost. A way to delay the curse for as long as possible, once the current sacrifice had made peace with her fate. Someone who had been borne that burden might have given up at the realization that the calamity was inevitable. But the sacrifices of the Kurokami family were familiar with suffering. All they wished for was that it would be worth something, and Toei was no different.
ありがとうございます、母上。トエは母上の、そしてご先祖様代々の苦労を決してないがしろにすることはありません。
Toei made that vow and looked up at the dimly lit bell. It shone there in solemn silence. Ooh!
それにしても陸奥の末裔め、一度ならず二度も我らを返り討ちにするとは。そなたはどうする？我らのすすすべてを集めれば十分な災厄となろう。あれのすすはあればよいが、たやすくは手に入るまい。それでもあれの生き木も欲するのか。そなたの手で自ら災厄を下したいと願うか。
無論にございます。兄上様のご無念を晴らすことこそ我らの悲願。 五つ子の邪法にて分かれた身とはいえ、その志は姉上様に勝るとも劣りません。
She slowly stood up. Her gaze was fearless, her eyes shining scarlet. Harbinger of the divine curse shall be. It happened long ago, when I was still a kid in kindergarten. Just like every other little girl my age, I was a proper lady. For me, playing house was a perfect recital of when I'd someday be a housewife too. I tried acting even cuter than normal when I was in front of the boys. I'd even get in trouble for playing with my mom's makeup and cookware sometimes too. I didn't mean any harm, of course, because I was that serious about my dream even back then, to become the perfect wife.
はいはい、先生はお父さんの役ね。ただいま。
あなた、おかえりなさい。お風呂にする？ご飯にする？
それでも私？
じゃあお風呂からにしようかな。
あ、
お風呂沸いてますよ。背中流してあげるね。
あら嬉しい。先生も椿子ちゃんみたいなお嫁さん欲しいな。
Even when Tanabata came around, my wish was the same. I want to be the perfect wife. But I was a kid. I never thought about it much deeper than that. I wanted to be a wife, but I never even considered that I'd need to marry someone to make that happen. Pretty stupid, huh? That's like the first thing you're supposed to think of. I wanted to be a wife, and yet I constantly be picking fights with boys back in kindergarten.
だからあなた、乱暴な漫画は椿子の手の届くところに置かないでって言ったでしょ。いい？椿子、お父さんの漫画は真似しちゃいけない乱暴な漫画なのよ。素敵なお嫁さんになりたかったら優しい女の子にならなくちゃ。乱暴はダメよ。
パパにもドロップキックとか円髄蹴りとかシャイニングウィザードとかもうやっちゃダメだぞ。第一な、お嫁さんというのは男の子に嫌われたらなれないんだぞ。
Those words were such a shock to me. I'd never realized you needed a boy's approval before you could be a wife.
これからはもう少し女の子らしくしなくっちゃね。
男の子とも仲良くしなさい。そうしたらきっと素敵なお嫁さんになれるぞ。
本当？じゃあ私、これからはもう喧嘩しない。優しい女の子になる。グッドモーニングモーニング。朝だよ。お嫁さんって大変だね。
どうして？
毎日旦那様より早起きして朝ごはん作るんでしょ。こんな朝ごはん一つ作るだけで青息と息なんで。
でもキコちゃんはこうして作ってくれたよ。僕はとっても嬉しいし、きっと未来の旦那さんも喜んでくれると思うな。
Okay, Suzumu, please. Don't be so dense.
進むは嬉しい
Tsubakiko, please don't be so forward.
嬉しいよ。
What? Suzumu, please. Again, don't be so dense.
こんな情けないベーコンエッグを作るお嫁さんでも？
僕のためを思って作ってくれたものならすごく嬉しいよ。そんな朝ごはんを毎日食べられたら毎日仕事を頑張れると思うよ。だからキコちゃんの未来のお婿さんはきっと幸せだと思うよ。
His words warmed Tsubakiko's heart. If her married life were anything like this, she felt she could take on the whole world. And if Suzumu were her husband, she believed she could do anything. Thus, she swore to keep up her training as she could someday be the perfect housewife. I almost always rode my bike to school. But when Suzumu and I were both riding our bikes, It felt like we were taking a nice romantic trip together. The early bird gets the worm, so they say, and that's precisely how I felt. I was in such a good mood today. I felt like I was one step closer to becoming the perfect wife. I was on top of the world. Everything was going so well. So why it all have to go south?
まだ祭るか？血祭り足りねえか？
A group of delinquents laid sprawled out on the ground before springing up and groveling on their knees.
させ血まみれ天女のバキコさんとは知らず。
次にススコーにちょっかい出したら祭る。問答無用で血祭る。
キコちゃんって強いね。
Yeah.
そりゃそうだぜ。何しろ昔は。
What? Normally, I'd slug Atsuta right in the gut to keep him from yapping about my past. But I wouldn't be fooling anyone after that horrendous display just now. Okay, I should probably back up and give some context here. Suzume and I met up with Asuta at the Iwaihime shopping district this morning. After that, we saw some idiots trying to bully one of the guys from our school. But after I politely asked them to cut it out, they said some choice words that would invoke any lady's wrath. I couldn't remember a thing after that. Next thing I knew, I was here. And with that, my dream went up in flames. Now Suzumu knew of my dark and sordid past. Things were really awkward between us that day. More accurately, I just didn't know how to approach him after that. So I simply kept avoiding him at every turn. Though I knew I couldn't keep it up forever. However patient Suzumu might be, even he had his limit. So when school ended for that day, he grabbed me by the arm.
キコちゃん、朝のことまだ気にしてるの？
Of course, you are the last guy I wanted knowing my secret. Yeah, right, like he'd ever believe me saying something that ladylike at this point. Why me?
まあ今さら可愛こぶったってもう手遅れだし、とほほとほほだよ。
でもかっこよかったよ。
え？
同じ学校の人が難儀してるのをみんな見て見ぬふりをして通り過ぎてたのに、キコちゃんは勇敢に声をかけたんだもの。
Exactly.
それに助けた彼はキコちゃんの知り合いだったわけでもないんでしょ。だからなおさらキコちゃんはかっこよかったよ。
そう？
うん。あんな剣幕で怒鳴ってる不良を前にキコちゃんはすっごく冷静だったし。
It was more like I lost my shit and gave it to the Satsui no Hado though. But apparently it looked like I was totally in control from behind. Anyway, I was glad he was proud of me for standing up for that guy. But that didn't excuse the slaughter that followed.
僕はそれを含めてもかっこよかったと思うよ。普段はおしとやかでも言うべき時やるべき時はやるって女性好きだから。
好き。
うん。
I never expected to find out Suzumu's type like this. Did I just drip a romance flag without even trying to? Was I seriously that lucky? We continued chatting in the dying sunlight as we walked our bikes home. In hindsight, Suzumu was probably being considerate of me in his own little way. In the end, his smile light my heart bare. But he'd also confessed his own shameful past, so we were even. Therefore, I had no reason to be embarrassed anymore. I was like, I don't know, like we'd already crossed some sort of emotional threshold. Now that I had nothing to hide from Suzumu, I felt I could show him the real me in its truest meaning.
あのさ、 茶化すのはなしで聞いてほしいんだけど。
うん。
I faltered at the serious look he was giving me. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't lose heart. I needed to be brave. Oh no, I couldn't do it. I couldn't look him in the eye. It'd be like staring at the sun. Thus, I shifted my gaze far behind him. What? I could hear children laughing and playing, but I felt I could hear my younger self's voice among them.
つばきこはね、素敵なお嫁さんになるの。
Well, isn't that sweet? That's a lovely little dream. You can do it, Tsubakiko. I know you can. Everyone was cheering me on with a big smile. And I wasn't simply telling people about my dream. I also knew those were magic words that put smiles on people's faces. I'm gonna be the perfect wife when I grow up. Adults would smile and rustle my hair affectionately whenever I uttered that spell. It made me so happy. May all your days be filled with smiles. Ah ha 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 ha.
どうしたの？キコちゃん。
Kiko had tried to tell me something, but then she saw something behind me and froze up like a deer in headlights. I turned around, but all I saw were the evening crowds of the Iwaihime shopping district. Nothing more, nothing less. Oh.
どうしたの？しっかり。
What is it? Kiko gripped her head and moaned. Her eyes were dazed as she was staggering. Could this be one of those hauntings Miss Hinagata had told me about? She said they wouldn't happen while I was around, but perhaps there were exceptions. At any rate, I couldn't leave Kiko out in the middle of the street. I parked our bike at the side of the road and grabbed her by the shoulder.
キコちゃん、大丈夫？僕がわかる？
She wailed as if in the midst of a nightmare. Her face was pale and clammy with sweat, while her eyes were wide and unfocused. A nightmare that struck in broad daylight. This had to be a haunting. Whatever the case, I had to get her home and let her rest. Then I'd call Miss Hinagata and ask what to do next. I wrapped my arm around Kiko's shoulder and hurried on home. What is it? I got a bad feeling and turned around. It felt as though something sickening was nearby, but there was nothing that fit that description in the crowd.
気持ち悪いな。
What is it? After Suzumu and Tsubakiko left the shopping district, an uncanny figure hiding in the darkness of a narrow back alley wriggled about. What? It was disgustingly obese and gave off a rank odor like sweat and a rancid sewer. Eee! Eee! It had small, childlike eyes that gleamed ominously. Eee! The man's breathing was loud and heavy. Either his nose was stuffed, or he did it on purpose. Greasy sweat trickled down the tip of his nose with each fetid and foul exhalation.
やっと見つけたよ。
What? Yikes!
つばきこちゃん、美人になったね。
Yikes! Omawari-san! I apologized as I left her room.
ケイコ、もっと頑張らなきゃ。
The more I devoted myself to my training, the stronger my power would grow. I was sure of it. I had to work harder so that Kiko wouldn't suffer from another haunting. Tsubakiko's breathing grew labored again. Beads of sweat rose to her forehead once more. She stood abruptly, rushed over to the door, locked it, and put up the chain. She then ran back into the room and violently shut the curtains. Tsubakiko used so much strength that she tore off one of the latches on the curtain rail. Though the sound it made was faint, it scared the living daylights out of her. What is it? Tsubakiko clung to the curtains as she nervously gazed outside through the gap between them. All she saw was the same scenery as always, but that wasn't enough to convince her. The room was pitch dark without sunlight. But Tsubakiko threw a blanket over her head and huddled in a corner of the room, leaving the lights off. Terror and anxiety danced across her eyes. She couldn't calm down at all. Just then, she heard a frightful sound. It felt as though it were growing louder by the second. Footsteps, perhaps? It was getting closer and closer. Tsubakiko held her breath hard enough to choke herself as she crawled over to the gap in the curtains. She peeked through and discovered it was the son of Suzumu punching the tree. He was in his dojo uniform, training more intensely than usual. It wasn't footsteps. Tsubakiko heaved a sigh of relief as she floated down to the floor. But her face showed no sign of ease at the moment. She was a nervous wreck, frightened by the slightest sound, peeking through the window of the door's peephole over and over again. What? She took her phone off her desk with trembling hands. After checking what year it was, she started counting something down with her fingers. And when she finished, she fell backwards as though she'd fainted. She was lucky her bed was there. Had she been even slightly off, she could have smashed her head on the edge of the bed. That was how hard her fall has been. She lay there frozen for so long, she started entertaining the idea she was in fact a puppet. No matter how many waves of terror assaulted her, her brain wouldn't tell her what it thought was so scary. And so she merely continued to tremble in fear without knowing the source of her fright. What happened? That guy. Was it a stalker?
見つけた。椿子ちゃんのお家見つけた。
I panicked. The more I thought about it, the harder it grew to breathe. The teacher laughed after announcing we had a study hall period, leaving the classroom in a festive mood, but I couldn't hear any of the usual hustle and bustle. All of a sudden, the classroom door opened. A gargantuan blob of skin-colored meat was standing there. It came literally out of nowhere, with no prior warning. The soft, flabby blob reminded me of a repulsive obese stomach. It was so tall and thick that it flooded the whole door. The door frame shook as the eerie blob pushed its abhorrent self through. Song of Saya? The blob grunted the same thing over and over. All of a sudden, I realized it sounded like it was saying Tsubakiko. And when I did, the blob's ominous sound turned into my name. Yee. My whole body broke out into chills and goosebumps. Icy needles pierced my brain all over. Even my heart froze with revulsion the moment I realized that blob was looking for me.
何言ってんの？わけわかんない。
The door frame creaked loudly, like it would break apart at any moment. The blob surged into the classroom at the moment and pounded the blackboard. It spewed something like squalid gravy all over it.
自習してろって言っただろう。遊んでいい時間じゃないんだぞ。
Huh? Wait, what?
お前ら来年は受験なんだぞ。いつまで気楽なつもりでいるんだ。
It was just our regular fat Japanese teacher. He was angry the class had ignored his instruction and used it as an excuse to chat with one another. I gasped for the air my lungs sorely craved. Did I have another daydream? Just like dreams, hauntings probably had varying degrees of vividness. So it was highly likely the one she'd had during Japanese was very detailed. Most dreams are forgotten upon awakening, but this one appeared to be an exception.
どんな夢を見たのか知らないけど、夢は夢だよ。
そうだよね。
ましてやそれが楽しい夢でなかったなら、さっさと忘れちゃうのが一番だと思うけどな。
そうだね。
I felt so bad. It was really getting to her. I had to find a way to lift her spirits.
そうだ、キコちゃん。
何
？She seemed surprised by my sudden shift in attitude. This might be a little pushy, but I had to cheer her up.
帰りにさ、ゲームセンターでも寄ってかない？
No, don't go take her to public area. There's a creepy guy following her.
何突然。
What was Suzumu thinking? How could he say it was okay after seeing that? Was he blind? The arcade entire was flooded with blobs and dripping juices, wasn't it? And the inside was bursting with these giant disgusting blobs. You could see something like blood vessel on their skin, wriggling like earthworms from time to time. They vibrated all over, as though they spotted me and were gesturing me over. Suzumu couldn't see them. He didn't see the blobs picking up from the shadows, moaning again and again for me to come on over.
どうしたの？顔色悪いよ。
ごめん、私先に帰るね。
え、キコちゃん？
Suzumu couldn't see them. No, no one could. Only me. Suzumu couldn't see the blobs at the arcade, and he hadn't seen that blob in the alley before either. That was why I always saying some nonsense about a chain. I left Suzumu and my bike behind and broke off into a dash. I figured running would get me out of there faster than taking the time to get on my back and pedal away. After all, the whole town was crawling with those things. The blobs popped up one after another. Alleys, shops, shutters, outdoor units, they were coming from everywhere. And they were all calling my name. Ew. Calm down, I had to calm down. There was no way those things were actually there. This had to be another one of those terrible daydreams I always had. I couldn't let it affect me. I couldn't.
つばきこちゃんも。パパ、全然 OK だね。
Oma warisan!
すぐに迎えに行くからね。そしたら今度こそお
No.
嫁さんにしてあげるからね。
No way. This was Suzumu. Suzumu, I could tell. So long as I kept a firm grip on my mind, I could actually recognize him as Suzumu. But this whole time I'd seen him as a blob. This couldn't be. My ass had to be playing tricks on me. That or I was back in the same horrible daydream. If I focused hard, Suzumu appeared the same as always. However, if I took my eyes off him for even a second, he turned into a blob again.
僕の顔何かある？
Oh
目
god,
やにでもついてるか
scary.
な？
そんなこと全然ないよ。ジロジロ見ちゃってごめんね。
If I left, ugh. If I let my guard down, not only did I see blobs, but I could also smell sour sweat. But at least Suzumu was fine. I could perceive him as his usual self so long as I honed my senses. The world was filled with those blobs, juices, and the rank stench of sweat. I knew the truth. There was no way they were blobs. All of them were ordinary people. They had to be. But since this morning, nearly everyone looked like those hideous flesh beasts. And I was probably the only one who saw them like that, because no one else was panicking. No one else found anything strange. I was the only one who could see this messed up world of meat. I gripped my stomach as it churned, but it didn't help. I couldn't stand it any longer. And a moment later, everything I'd been holding back up to this point finally broke loose. At first, I had no idea what had just happened. Kiko must have thrown out or something, and she had the most unfortunate luck of getting vomit on a delinquent's clothes. Naturally, he was furious and grabbed Kiko by the collar. That act had likely evoked her wrath. Kiko had butt him right in the face, sending blood gushing from his nose to his chin. Enraged, the delinquent lunged to Kiko, but she had butt him again. His blood splattered into Kiko's face, leaving blotches behind. The nearby girls screamed when they finally noticed the brutal fight.
何しやがったこら！構わねえ！ぶっ殺しちまえ！
Kiko-chan! That wasn't a scream, it was a war cry. Kiko's face was terrifyingly visage of indignation and repugnance. I wanted to stop the fight right away, but I couldn't get through the ring of confused students surrounding them with their bikes. It was like she was fighting for her life. Kiko was a frenzied animal driven by fright. That was right, this wasn't rage, it was terror that spurred her. Kiko didn't do this because she wanted to. She lost herself in some kind of fear. I finally made my way through the ring of bicycles.
キコちゃん、やめるんだ！
Kiko howled at the top of her lungs. She completely lost sight of herself. Kiko trampled over a bicycle as she charged at me. Eee. I silently asked for her forgiveness and then... Oh! Though my fist was not for fighting, I buried it deep into Kiko's soft abdomen. I winced. It must have hurt a lot. Kiko gripped her stomach as she fell to the ground, moaning with pain.
ごめんねキコちゃん、仕方なかった。
今年で9年9年
Hmm?
あいつが
先生方の話を漏れ聞く限りではこのまま自宅謹慎になるかもね。
今のキコちゃんはしばらく家で休んだ方がいいと思います。先日の霊障の時から少し様子がおかしくて。
そのあたりの話詳しく聞かせてくれる？
はい。
I told Miss Hinagata all about Kiko's abnormal behavior recently.
そういえば先生、
何？
今年で9年目って何か心当たりありますか？
Miss Hinagata's smile instantly dropped. Even I didn't know what it meant. I only heard Kiko say that after I punched her. I brought it up to Miss Hinagata in hope she might get more of it than me.
今朝キコちゃんがそんなことをつぶやいてた気がして、9年目ってなんだろうって思いまして。
Miss Hinagata's face grew paler by the moment. She suddenly checked her calendar as though she remembered something.
平成年度から6、7、8、9、9年目。まさか。
The grim look in her eyes made it clear that I was to repeat this to no one.
春宮さんには
Okay, when she was a child.
本人も思い出したくない気の毒な過去があるの。
No. The park was an all-you-can-play paradise for the children, their own personal kingdom. The swings were thrilling, and they loved the slides. The sandbox was their canvas to craft castles and cakes right out of their dreams, buckets and shovels their paintbrushes. This particular park was the biggest one in the area, and there were always lots of children playing there. It wasn't just kids, of course. The place was also used by joggers, elderly folks taking a rest, and office workers on break. So the children played merrily as adults watched over them. The parents could also let her children play with each other with little to fear. So there was nothing odd about grown-ups sitting on the benches watching the children play. Furthermore, adults who frequented the park were recognized and accepted by the children. That obese man was one such adult. He was likely in his late 20s or early 30s. He had unusually childlike eyes and would always come to play with children in the same worn-out gray sweatshirt. He was fond of playing with the girls, and particularly enjoyed playing house with them. No, not her. The girls wanted to play the part of the mother or older sister, but no one was lining up to play the father. And so it was that Mr. Daddy took the lead and played that role for them. They all loved him. Yikes! Tsubakiko Harumiya was one of said girls and called him Daddy. There was a snack shop near the park popular with the kids that sold plenty of snacks for 10 yen. They ranged from salami flavored to salad flavored and even fish flavored. Most Japanese children had snacks like that at least once or twice. Mr. Daddy would often buy a bag full of candy and give it out to the children in the park. Yikes! That was why they all loved him.
パパ、おかえりなさい。
No!
うぃん ただいま、つばきこちゃん。ほーら、素敵なお嫁さんはパパが帰ってきたらお帰りのチューをするんだぞ。
いい。
おかえりのチュー。
The young girl kissed the man on the cheek. He reciprocated with a kiss from his own thick lips. Yikes!
つばきこちゃんにもチュー。
パパくちゅぐったい。ペロペロしちゃやだ。
No! Though through candy and playing house under the name of wife training, yikes, the man grew closer and closer to Tsubakiko. Having an adult friend also made her feel superior to her peers. What's more, she believed that if she continued training to be a wife, her dreams would come true. Eventually, Tsubakiko started visiting the man's apartment. No! No! Ah!
休刑10年、判決は懲役9年。そのクソデブは最後まで彼女とは友人同士で遊んでいただけだと主張しやがったわ。ぐだぐだと上告してなおも罪を認めず、確定に随分と時間をかけたみたいよ。その上、幼い春宮さんは警察などで何度も男にされたこと、させられたことを口述させられたわ。それがどれほどヘドの出ることだったか。
Miss Hinagata trembled with a rage I'd never seen from her before. I was utterly stunned by what I heard, so much I even forgot to feel anger.
でも彼女にとって一番ショックだったことは、信じていたものに裏切られたことだった。された仕打ちがじゃない、彼女の純真な気持ちが裏切られたことが何よりも彼女を傷つけた。
I can't. It was childish, but she earnestly wished to become the perfect wife. She's trained to make that dream come true, and Mr. Daddy had generously offered his assistance. Some of it has been strange, unusual, and nigh unbearable, but it was all in order to become the perfect wife. No matter how repulsive his actions objectively were, she believed those were wonderful times that would help her fulfill her dream. Then one day, the adults suddenly barged in and flipped everything she believed in right on its head. Her parents and the police consoled her every time they met, and spoke ill of Mr. Daddy. At first, Tsubakiko didn't understand any of it, but gradually she came to understand what had been done to her. At that moment, all negative and positives in her world were inverted. Oh no, poor girl.
かわいそうに、まだ忘れられないのね。
男なんか死ね、みんな死ね、死ね。
All I could do was look to the ceiling and fight back the boundless rage and sadness that threatened to spill from my eyes. She chosen to trust and return to the dream that been snatched from her as a child once again.
なんて強さ。
No one understood what those words had meant. This year is the 9th year. Tsubakiko heard the clatter of someone trying to open the door. She wondered if her mother was back. No, please no. They seem to have trouble unlocking it.
お母さん、大丈夫？鍵開けようか。
Something wasn't right. It was like they were trying to force the lock open with the wrong key. Oh no. Tsubakiko's body went numb with absolute fear. It was him. It couldn't be possibly anyone else. He must have brought a spare key to enter her room. She was sure of it. Eee.
パパが帰ってきたよ。おかえりのチュー。
Eee. The man lunged forward in his dirty shoes the moment Tsubakiko tried to scream. His thick hand covered her mouth. He cunningly locked the door and the chain at some point. No! Tsubakiko slowly staggered to her feet and screamed. Her face was contorted into a mask of ferocity, as it always was when she beat back her terror with rage. Regardless, however, that was her strength.
よくも私を騙したな。私の夢をよくももう私はあの時の非力な私じゃない。待ってたぜ。
The floor shook with a rumble. Dust fell from the ceiling. A giant blob was creeping down the stairs. That hideous freak of nature was him, no doubt about it. Tsubakiko trusty metal bat had appeared in her hand out of nowhere. She raised it and charged. Yes! Yes, Tsubakiko, yes! Tsubakiko pummeled the blob over and over. It groaned and shook each time. The blob's roar and foul breath startled Tsubakiko. Just then it charged at her like a giant toad. Ah! She was overwhelmed by its vast size in the blink of an eye. Tsubakiko fought hard, but she had no way of resisting the giant blob leaning over her. No matter how hard she struggled, it only drilled home that she was powerless against the blob. Her body was giving out faster than her heart. She continued cursing as she fought to keep her spirit from yielding. The blob's drool gripped on her face, and as the hideous creature's lip and tongue desecrated her own without reserve, she heard her heart shatter. Tsubakiko shed bitter tears. She shut her eyes and mouth, a small bit of resistance against the man licking her face over and over. As much as she hated to admit it, she knew she didn't stand a chance against an adult, a man, him. She tried to act tough, but she was a little more than a doll to an adult man. So all she could do was be a doll until he was done playing with her. She couldn't stop weeping from the pain and sorrow of having her very autonomy denied. Eventually, the blob stepped back and picked her up. What? She could resist no further. After all, she was already a doll. No, this is so scary. Her limbs had become ball-jointed at some point. The blob bent her joint and played with her like the doll she was. After this, he'd play with her in those filthy adult ways, just like back then. If she was destined to feel such pain, then she wished her heart could have been the same as it was that day.
前ごときにキコちゃんをお嫁にやれるものか。
Suzumu had suddenly appeared in this crazy world. Though he looked the same as always, he had this nearly divine aura about him. His eyes blazed scarlet and glared at the blob with conviction.
お前に名乗る名など僕は持ち合わせない。喋るな。お前の邪悪にヘドが出る。
Though Susumu was the smaller one, he was crudely intimidating the blob.
お前の正体は分かっている。だからもうのさばるな。
The blob moaned and shrunk back. Now free, Tsubakiko staggered to her feet.
キコちゃん、君にはできる。そいつを倒せる。
無理だよ。弱な私の力じゃ大人には男には。
そいつは大人でも男でもない。人間でもない。化け物でさえない。お前には存在さえない。お前などただ通り過ぎるだけで形を失う煙以下の存在。なぜならお前はお前はすでに2年前獄中で病死しているじゃないか。
てめえ、もう死んでるのかよ。私の前に二度と現れられねえのかよ。笑えら。じゃあ私は意もしない男が現れるのにビビってたってのかよ。バカにしやがって。この野郎。
Tsubakiko's rage revived her fighting spirit. Things were different this time around. Each time Tsubakiko swung the bat, the blob was smashed. It groaned and retreated. Tsubakiko smote the blob with righteous indignation. All the sorrow and anguish from all those years back surged forth with every swing. Eventually, a man's head poked up from the crushed blob. It was the same man from Tsubakiko's nightmares.
私は素敵なお嫁さんになるんだ。その夢、お前なんかに終わらされてたまるかよ。
Having defeated her trauma with her own hands, she fell deep into a sea of sleep. Its waters enveloped her gently and affectionately. Just then, a figure with antlers emerged from the light.
なんと
The divine curse was beside herself. Not even she could have imagined Tsubakiko overcoming the manifestation of her mental trauma by her own hands.
鈴原鈴夢、恐ろしい男。
感謝する。
What?
君のおかげでキコちゃんに心の傷を自ら乗り越える機会が得られた。あの化け物を僕の手でなく彼女自身の手で倒す機会を与えてくれたことを僕は感謝する。
お前は今この場で消さねば必ずや我らの悲願の邪魔になる。
The divine curse raised her hands, and a giant hatchet appeared with radiant light. Its thick blade alone was as tall as Suzumu. But Suzumu wasn't afraid. Quite the contrary, his face brimmed with gratitude towards the divine curse.
感謝を込めて神に奉じる。
Suzumu slowly raised his fist and made his dedication. Dazzling light gradually gathered in that fist.
我らの悲願、兄上様のご無念を晴らすこと。邪魔立てはさせぬぞ、鈴原鈴夢、陸奥の末裔。
覇者検証、邪悪を破りて正しきを示す。
死ねー。
After Kiko returned to school for the first time in days, she was swarmed by our classmates. Her eyes went wide with confusion.
何？おはようみんな。噂聞いたわよ。椿子、ムカつく不良グループをやっつけたんだって。
いつも駐輪場でためのってるドキュンどもをフルボッコにしたそうじゃ。マジ超強え。
何しろハルミヤはグレート硬派だからな。不良どもには容赦がねえ。
あの駐輪場にいつもいる連中、感じ悪くて嫌だったのよね。
ハルミヤがやっつけてくれてからあいつらすっかりおとなしくなったらしいぜ。
That's when I had spread rumors while Kiko was absent. The delinquent had gotten in a fight with Kiko after she'd warned them to quit messing with others, and she wiped the floor with all of them. Those rumors had reached the delinquents too, of course, but they hadn't said anything. It was only natural. They probably didn't want to get mixed up with Kiko again after what she put them through. Kiko hadn't imagined in her wildest dream that she'd receive a hero's welcome. Embarrassed, she declined everyone's badgering for details of her heroic tale and sat herself down. Thanks to Miss Hinagata's careful machinations, Kiko's reputation remained mostly intact with the teachers too. Kiko owed it all to her positive behavior so far. Psychological episodes and sudden outbursts were not uncommon during adolescence. Kiko's episode would likely be chalked up as one of those be quietly forgotten. Fortunately, it didn't seem like the delinquents were badly hurt either. I felt a little bad for them, but at least we could put the whole thing behind us.
おや、姉御、3日間の長いお勤め、お疲れ様でやした。
姉御、
春宮先輩の武勇伝、1年生の間でも有名でしたよ。男子なんか舎弟にしてもらいたいとか、姉御と呼ばせてもらいたいとか、大した浮かれようで。
かわいい顔してやるもんだね。
みんなもそれくらいにしてあげて。本人は気にしてるんだから。
もうみんなに散々言われて慣れたというか諦めたというか。
俺たちもこれからは春宮のこと姉御って呼ぼうぜ。
いやだ、もう一度姉御言うたらドタマ勝ち割るぞこら。
わあ、姉御堪忍を。
言ったな、ぬっころす、祭る、血祭るぞ、暑さ夏や。
Kiko's face was cheery as she chased Natsu around the room.
アイドルだったら喧嘩騒ぎとか下手すると命取りなんですけどね。春宮先輩の場合逆にポイントアップしててなんだか羨ましいです。そんなので羨ましがられたくないよ。
3年の男子でもキコチンに惚れたって言ってるの結構いるよ。特に空手部とか柔道部とかバトル系の連中が仲良しになりたいなってラップ。
雨降ってなんとやらですね。先輩の下駄箱がラブレターでいっぱいになるのも時間の問題だったりして、
その中の誰か一人を選ぶまで男たちにたくさん言い寄られるね。
グレートだね、モテモテだぜ。
その中にきっとキコちゃんを素敵なお嫁さんにしてくれる人がいるんじゃないかな。
何他人事なんだか。私をお嫁にやれるかどうかはスズムがしっかり判断することなんだから。
そうなの？
でもスズムのお眼鏡にかなうような人じゃないと、とてもじゃないけどスズムには紹介できないよ。私の彼氏になるのはちょっとハードかもだね。
スズム以上の男か。
ハードル高いどころの話じゃないですね。
キコちゃん、そんなこと言ってたらお嫁さんに行けなくなっちゃうんじゃない？
そうかな。そうかもだね。スズムのハードルが高すぎるせいで私が今期を逃しちゃったらスズムのせいかもだね。
そんな僕のせいにされちゃうの？
おいおい春宮、グレートスサーラにだって素敵なお嫁さんを探す権利があるんだぜ。
校庭にウルトラレアカードが落ちてない？
なんだと？どこに？どこ？
What is this? What's with this bit? Right when Natsuya tried to leap from the window to the schoolyard, Tsubakiko grabbed Suzumu a bit roughly and planted a kiss on his lips. Kanae, Riria, and Suzumu himself were wide-eyed with shock.
スズムには素敵なお嫁さんを探す権利なんて必要ないの。私が今予約しちゃったから。
でも僕より素敵な人が現れるかもよ。
全身全霊をかけてそんな人は生涯現れないし、もし現れても関係ないから。
見せつけてくれちゃうね。
ススハラ先輩より素敵な人が現れないという点には同意します。でもススハラ先輩にとって春宮先輩より素敵な人が現れないとは限りませんからね。
そうそう、
年上の女房は銀のわらじを履いてでも探せって言うしね。現役アイドルが一般男性と結婚なんてよくあることですしね。
Tsubakiko punched her palm with a daring smirk.
祀られてえか、命知らずが。
春宮椿子、てめえらの喧嘩